Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me today on the recorded session about VA disability claims and more. My name is Sam. This is a continuation of Tom's previous webinar on VA disability claims, and it's in a three-part series. So the goal of this webinar is to give broad exposure to programs that exist. My goal is at the end of the three parts of the presentation is that you have learned at least one new program that the VA offers. This is giving for some folks a heads up that these programs exist so that you can take the appropriate steps to move towards that direction and get what it is that you deserve and the help that you deserve. Ideally, this is for people who are separating and are looking to leave the active duty service in about the 18-month time frame. That doesn't mean that other people can't use this information, but I think that as somebody who has separated within the last year, I have a pretty good understanding of how things should have been, how things are, and the things that I'm looking forward to moving forward. So some housekeeping items. There are a lot of presentation links and resources for this presentation. I've included this QR code here, and it's going to be at the start of every part that we start. So if you join us for a future presentation, this QR code will be there. VetSec is a nonprofit cybersecurity organization dedicated to helping veterans connect with job opportunities, resume help, as well as training and education opportunities. And I'm so grateful that they have given me the platform to speak today as one of their members. My big thing is I'm looking to get into business continuity under the operational resiliency field. And this is part of that process. It's ensuring that our community has the resiliency that it needs to move forward and do great things in the civilian world. Okay, so this recording is on YouTube, and there will be an option for questions in the future. But for now, we'll just start rolling into the presentation. My background, again, my name is Sam. I am a former active duty Navy surface warfare officer. I spent some time in Japan. I spent some time in Virginia. After I left active duty last year, I joined the Individual Ready Reserves, and I sold my car, packed up all of my belongings, and traveled 28 countries around the world as a solo backpacker. Where I am now in the claims process, I have a rating after 266 days after separating from service. I did not have a great time trying to figure things out. And I think that some of my experience is going to be valuable so that if you're in that same situation, you know what to look forward to and anticipate things that are coming up, or you know how to better plan your transition in terms of the VA disability claim space. I am not going to say what my rating is. I will say that it is enough for me to have total VA healthcare coverage, and it is still where it's less than 100% to where I'm in the position to where I can request supplemental claims and higher level claims for the evidence to be looked at. What's also unique about the perspective that I bring is before I joined the active duty Navy, I actually studied the business of healthcare in college. I studied how the business of healthcare affects the healthcare operations, management, and insurance. I also was a volunteer application federal healthcare marketplace counselor. I shadowed a physical therapy clinic, and I interned at the #1 cancer treatment center in the United States. So it's not that I understand everything that goes day to day in the VA or in the hospital or in the American healthcare system. I just happen to have a perspective of how big things shape and affect and drive our American healthcare system. So a disclaimer, I am just a member for VetSec. Any opinions or considerations that I mention are purely my own. I don't represent the board members or the organization, the cybersecurity nonprofit, in any shape or form. I am not a medical professional. Anything that I say should not be construed as medical evidence because I am not licensed, I am not board certified, I am not anything. I am not a representative of the Department of Veteran Affairs. I don't have any training or accreditation from the Department of Veteran Affairs. I am not a accredited or certified veteran service officer, and I am not an attorney. I am not your attorney, and anything that we discuss today is not a attorney, should not construe an attorney-client relationship. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I recommend that you fast forward 1.5 times, 2 times the speed, because this is a lot of information. I know that there's going to be links for you to select the topic when we discuss it that best fits your situation. But if you're looking and you're watching this through the entire way, go ahead and hit the faster speed option. Okay, so preface. So I don't think that many of us within the transitioning or in the veteran space understand that the VA is a huge, huge federal agency. It's segmented into three parts. There is a National Cemetery Administration. So if you're thinking about the Arlington National Cemetery, the VA deals with that. There's a Veteran Benefits Administration who deals with the VA disability claims process, as well as the home loans, GI Bill, that kind of thing. And then lastly, the thing that we think of as an American society when we say the VA, we have the Veterans Health Administration. So what's interesting about this is the Veterans Health Administration is the largest healthcare system in the United States. In our country, we don't have a single system. We have many systems and we have many small systems. But the Department of Veteran Affairs, by and large, for their health care side of things, is the largest of that organization in the United States, with the largest population that it serves, depending on the area that you're in. A few different things that I think are misnomers or myths about the VA, and part of the reason why the VA gets so much flack is just the existence of how our healthcare system is in general, right? And I think that it's going to be a rough transition when we come from the services and care and speed that we would receive while on active duty, and seeing that on the civilian side as a veteran. The Department of Veteran Affairs has unfortunately a very negative perception in the public facing domain. And I want to say that there's a high likelihood that the issues that we claim about the VA as a whole, it's tied into things that are in every hospital, in every healthcare system in America. And one of the reasons why it's so publicly known about the shortcomings of the VA is because those are a matter of public record. A normal hospital that's a private entity does not have a legal obligation to give up all of its information and be accountable to its citizens and be accountable to its patients and to Congress. The Department of Veteran Affairs is. And if you look on the website, you can find statistics of how long wait times are, what veterans seem to think their quality of care is, and the ratings that they have provided. So all of this is public knowledge, Freedom of Information Act, all the way. It's just that I want to say that it's a difficult position for the Department of Veteran Affairs, because damned if you do, damned if you don't, there's going to be public scrutiny no matter what. The next thing that I wanted to mention is that the Department of Veteran Affairs, because it is a federal entity, is governed by federal regulations that have the force of law. What I mean by that is Congress passes laws that change from bills to laws. And then what happens is at the federal agency or department level, they have to interpret those laws and create these federal regulations that direct on how it's done. And the good news about these is these inevitably lead to policies and procedures that we as the common person, the common citizen of the country, we can look ourselves because it's public information. So there are federal regulations that are created that have the force of law, that are created to support and protect our population. And that's all I have for this. So moving on. So these are follow-up items for Tom's previous webinar. If you want the link to that, it's our presentation with questions at the end that he previously did. So this is building up upon that. Some updates and some changes that I wanted to add to what Tom had said. So he mentioned TRICARE Online as an option to get information about disability benefits questionnaire information. Unfortunately, I just checked, TRICARE Online has been retired in favor of the military healthcare system, Genesis. If you're like me and you have difficulty in visualizing and understanding how VA math works, I found that this is probably the best video that's existing on YouTube for you to watch. It's from the Department of Veteran Affairs themselves, and it shows you a visual description of how the VA math works. For me, when I watched that video for the first time, things just clicked and things made sense. If you're also like me and you struggle with doing the math and doing all the calculations yourself, I recommend that you use online calculators like this one from the Disabled American Veterans Organization in order to figure things out instead of using the VA's chart table, because it requires you to go on like the X and Y axis and like make sure the numbers meet up and then do all these other things. It's just a lot simpler, at least for me, to punch a bunch of numbers in, to click a few buttons and then give me the actual number that the rating is at. And then understand that based on the rounding rules, whether or not I am at the next percentage of 10 or the lower percentage of 10. This is the link to the veteran pension. If you're above the age of 65 and you meet the income threshold, then this is an additional pension. Aid in attendance, this is the link for caretakers and those who require the assistance of caretakers. You can have additional compensation come in to support that situation. The dependency and indemnity compensation and special monthly compensations. So again, the special monthly compensations are for very specific conditions, and this is on top of the normal VA disability process. So these specific conditions will garner additional money that's outside and beyond the VA disability benefits compensation. The DIC, that's for situations in which the veteran is at a 100% permanent and total, PNT, and within 5 years, if the veteran passes away from a service-connected disability, then that the family members will be covered and will be provided compensation. In the event that it's greater than 5 years, I can't quite remember if it's 5 years or 10 years, then any death from any sort of disability that would entitle the family to DIC. So these are the pay rates. And then this is also something that might pertain to some of us. There are benefits for veterans' parents. So if the veterans' parents are part of a household, then that could be grounds for DIC. Or if it's just looking at basic disability compensation, then adding them to the family household is an option. Tom mentioned community care. I'll mention more about that in part 2. All right, before leaving active duty in the claims process. So ideally, this is specifically for people who are within that 18-month window before separating from active duty. This is not going to cover all situations. We're talking about people who have been federally activated in the National Guard, people who are on IDES and undergoing medical separation or retirement from active duty. But I would like to give some perspective on what it's like and things that you should do or keep an eye out for before you separate. So first things first, what in the world is VA disability? I encourage everybody to think more about this as workers' compensation. When we say disability, that comes with a lot of loaded connotations. It means something to one person, and it may mean something completely different to a different person. But frankly, we're visual people, and if we see somebody and they claim disability and there's physically nothing that appears to be wrong with them, then we can get judgmental, and there's other things that come with that. So workers' compensation is a better way of understanding this. Whenever you join active duty, and for some of you, you might have joined multiple times, but whenever you join active duty, you're coming in with the understanding that your body, your function, your well-being is full, your cup is full. But after you separate or you retire, and after time has passed, if you think about your body as a tool or the cup, if you're looking at a cup, some of the cup has been emptied. There's been wear and tear. I think it would be disingenuous for us to think that we are exactly the same before we joined active duty. So workers' compensation. The other thing I wanted to warn people about is be careful about who you share your percentage information with. I'm thankful that there's people who are willing to help me through this process before I separated from the Navy. I'm thankful for people who feel confident about sharing the information that they have and the process that they went through. But at the end of the day, I recommend that you treat it like as if you had won a lottery ticket, which is don't tell anybody, maybe consult an attorney. Because there's very few good things that come around sharing the percentage information and sharing the amount that comes with the disability benefits compensation. There are people who think differently about veterans who have disability. There are people who say that they're not disabled enough. There are people who say that those veterans are disabled too much. There are people who are jealous. There are people who will be asking for money. There are people who will make disparaging comments and jeers and backhanded comments. It's not really something that's their business, and I encourage you to keep that information to yourself and to your spouse and your very close friends and family. If you're still in, record everything and claim everything. And I know that this is frustrating because you probably heard this before, but when I say that, I really do mean that. The things that you're looking for and the things that you're complaining about, you don't know if it's going to help you in the end. You don't know if it's going to be that one small piece of evidence during active duty service that will propel you to a higher category or that will give you the grounds for being able to claim something later down the line. You don't know if things will get worse, and you don't know what small detail will make a difference. For example, did you know that you're rateable for scars? And not only are you rateable for scars, but there's a separate rating for scars that have some sort of like occupational or social impairment. For those that are looking at just scars in general, I did the ChatGPT thing and I looked at the measurements of what they're looking for. If you have an approximate size of a Post-it note in total of scars, that is grounds for a claim. So you don't know what small things will make a difference in your actual disability claims process. So claim everything. In terms of like how to do that or how to notate that, we'll talk about it in a second. Submit your intent to file. Even if you don't go through the benefits delivery and discharge process, even if you decide to file 3 years from now, maybe not that long because then the intent to file is good for a year. But your intent to file is a form that you submit to the Department of Veteran Affairs that says that at some point within the next 365 days, I intend to file a disability claim of some sort. And why that's important is because when that claim does get figured out, when there is a decision made on that, hopefully it's for in your favor, then all of that back pay compensation goes all the way back to that date of that intent to file. For those of you that are still on active duty, when you file that intent to file, it takes effect the day after you leave active duty service. Take a photo of every single medical related device that you have been given or that you've been prescribed. And same thing with the medication stuff. For some of you, it might be too late because you might have had something that you tossed out a long time ago. But this is something I wish I had done because I don't have ready access to that equipment or I don't have that equipment before and come to find out it actually is an important piece of evidence that I want to show because sometimes the medical records do not show that I was issued it or that I was prescribed that device. So things like wrist braces, leg braces, nighttime mouth guards, night splints, which are used to treat plantar fasciitis of flat feet. If you've been diagnosed with sleep apnea, it's like having a photo or bringing in a CPAP machine. These are all important pieces of medical evidence that you need, that you can submit. And if that wasn't clear already, this whole process for claiming benefits, it's more or less a legal type of process. It requires you to submit evidence. There's judges involved if you want to get them involved. This is a legal process. So part of this is promoting medical evidence and giving yourself the best shot. For those of you that are seeking mental health in some shape or form, I've had this conversation before with people when I was in service, and I can't stress how important this is now. So I believe that everyone should receive the help that they need. But there are better ways to have that care reflected in your record so that when you separate or when you retire, it gives grounds for you to put in this disability claim for mental health. Now, when we say mental health, we're talking about the umbrella of things. There's only one rating that the VA will provide, and that's an encapsulation of PTSD, military sexual trauma, MST, depression, anxiety, insomnia. All of these are considered under the mental health umbrella, and as a result, it's a combined rating, and that's how that works. For providing evidence for this, it's best if you have it directly in your military medical record, right? So seeing, in my case, a shipboard psychiatrist, or if you're at a military treatment facility, seeing a psychiatrist there. That doesn't mean that you can't seek care elsewhere. That doesn't mean that your primary source of mental health care isn't elsewhere. I'm just saying that if you go to places like for the Navy for fleet and family, or if you're going to military one source, or you're going to doctors on demand, there's a high likelihood that in these other places, yes, it is less likely or not likely at all that it will affect future career or your security clearance or whatever concerns that you have. But at the same time, it does put you in a weird situation, a precarious situation when it comes to doing your VA disability claims. Okay. Before you leave, I recommend doing a living will, medical power of attorney, and advance directive. I'm not going to explain exactly what these are. Just know that these are medically important pieces of paper. They're legal documents, and they usually require a lawyer to sign off on these. These usually cost hundreds of dollars if you do this out in the civilian world, and I don't see a valid reason for somebody not doing it unless they didn't have the time to do so. So for the Navy, even if you have a judge advocate general lawyer on board your ship, and you're one of the few ships that has that capability, you still have to go onto base to go what's called the ROSO, the Regional Legal Service Office. This is going to be multiple visits. You might have to call in several times to get an appointment. It usually takes several months depending on how backed up they are. And there's going to be a whole swearing in process, whole signing, whole sitting down with an attorney. It is an involved process. So if you haven't done so already, I recommend that you get started on that. For those of you that are Navy or Naval Reserve Officer Training Corps graduates and commissionees like myself, or in similar situations in other Reserve Officer Training Corps, unless you are on scholarship and currently active duty during a summer cruise, the time period that you were wearing a uniform during that time doesn't count for VA disability compensation purposes. That time does not count. The times that you were on active duty, yes, that technically counts, but I would recommend that you don't include that in your disability claims because chances are you've had plenty of time to seek care, diagnoses, follow-up care afterwards while you're active duty. It's just going to make things a lot more confusing when somebody's like, oh, so you were active duty for 1 month, a year before you became an officer? Like, how does that work? And then you have to explain this whole process about like, well, technically I was individual ready reserves without a real rank and like all this stuff. Just keep it simple, keep it within your active duty time frame after you've commissioned. For those of you that were S&P program, which is the dual National Guardsman enlisting and going into the Army ROTC program, this I think is like a completely different situation for you because I believe you would have to be activated on federal orders. Your mileage may vary, but that's how I understand how the law is written. For those of you that are in the service academies, I'll leave it up to you on how you want to approach this, but technically during that time frame you were active duty, so that time frame also counts towards your VA disability claims process. Again, your mileage may vary. All right, so opportunities to communicate your symptoms and your issues so that they're grounds for future disability claims. Now, part of this process is getting that diagnosis, but frankly, sometimes the providers do not give an explicit diagnosis and instead just treat your symptoms. So if we're just focusing on creating evidence for you to use later on, at the very least, you can communicate the things that you're going through and the things that you're experiencing. So at least for the Navy side of things, the Navy has moved to an annual checkup called a electronic periodic health assessment, EPHA. This is a online form that you can do on a computer, and you can list all of the conditions and all the ailments that you have. Now, in terms of actually follow through and actually getting those things seen so that it's not just in your record, you have treatment or you've spoken with a provider about this issue that you're having, make sure you follow up. But this is a method in which you can have your stuff inputted in and you have control over the words that you put in. There's also Genesis. Genesis, ever since the advent of the Defense Health Agency, which is a conglomeration or combining of all the health services for the active duty military. I'm not sure how the Coast Guard works because they're under the Department of Homeland Security. But Genesis is the new electronic health record system that the military treatment facilities are supposed to use. I will tell you that at least on the Navy side, the surface Navy side, surface ships have not moved to this yet, and they're still using the old electronic health record system. So there's some issues with that we can talk about in a second. But within Genesis, if you log into Genesis, you have the ability to provide messaging to whatever team, medical treatment team that you're looking to communicate with. This is encapsulated in your record. So if you want to talk about symptoms, you want to talk about the issues that you're having, this is a different method that you can type and personally put into your record your concerns. Who can issue a formal medical diagnosis? Now, I think this is important to understand because not every medic, not every corpsman can provide that medical diagnosis. And it's not just doctors. It's not just doctors that can provide a viable medical diagnosis for your disability claims purposes. So we have the physicians who will be an MD or a DO. We'll have the PA or the PAC, which stands for physician assistant. Physician assistants generally operate with the same scope of practice and the same prescribing, diagnosing authority as physicians do. Just depending on the state, it constricts their scope of practice. And an important thing about how they function is they, for the most part, have to provide care and diagnoses and prescriptions under the viewpoint of a practicing physician. So that's what they are. NPs are nurse practitioners. Typically, nurse practitioners are experienced registered nurses who have undergone additional education and are authorized in most states with the same scope and responsibilities, prescribing and diagnosis authority as a physician. A big difference between what they can do and what a PA can do is a nurse practitioner in some states do not require a physician to operate under, so they can go and open up their own practice, their own clinic. DPT stands for Doctor of Physical Therapy. There is a difference between a physical therapist and a physical therapy technician. So know the difference. One of them can actually diagnose you. One of them is in charge of the whole rehabilitation process. DDS or DMD, these are both licensures for dentists. So dentists can also provide diagnoses within their scope of practice. Right? And it's something unique to the services. I know that when I looked this up, this was with the Air Force and the Navy and Marine Corps. So for the Air Force, it's independent duty medical technician. And then for the Navy and Marine Corps, it's independent duty corpsman. So who these people are they are enlisted medical providers who have had the experience to warrant additional training. And after going through some intensive training, they have the scope of practice, the prescribing and diagnosing power that's on the same level as a physician. I don't know quite how it works in terms of like their scope of practice and the things that's beyond what they're comfortable or what they are allowed to prescribe and treat. But they are also able to give diagnoses and see you for treatment. And as a result, the care that you receive from these enlisted personnel, it goes into your military service record, or it should. Getting your medical records. I'll share my story. Your mileage may vary, but there's a whole bunch of records that I have, and it's just like a mishmash of things from when different systems were in place, and those systems were in vogue, if you will, in different parts of my time in service, even though I was in for 5 years. So a lot has changed during that time frame, and I wanted to share about my process. So electronic health records. What I had to do was I had to go to the local military treatment facility because I was stationed on a ship. Even though I was stationed on the ship and I had physicians, I had dentists, I had support there. For record purposes, I had to go to the closest military treatment facility, to the closest military hospital. I found the records department and I filled out a paper form, and it took me about a month for me to receive my records. This is important because you have to take your records and upload it as evidence into va.gov when you have the opportunity, or provide it to a veteran service officer when you're doing your claim. So you can put all records when you're requesting the records on that sheet of paper, but it might be easier if you put that and you also put every single one that you know of that you have some sort of record in. Right? I'm not going to explain what these acronyms mean because you can look these up yourself and it's not super important to our conversation. But HAMES or HIMES, depending on how you pronounce it, this is scanned pieces of medical documentation that doesn't fall quite neatly into another previous or current electronic health record. So anything that's scanned in, that's where this would be. ALTA is the predecessor to Genesis. ALTA is still used on some US Navy ships today, and that is a separate record. Now, this is just for you to know, but sometimes there's connectivity issues on ships. Go figure. And that connectivity impacts the way that information is uploaded into Genesis, which is the bulk of like how information is for medical record keeping purposes is stored these days. Genesis is the current electronic health record. It's used in military treatment facilities. For behavioral health, I was told this. I don't have anything confirming this, but if you're looking for behavioral health records, which you should, right, because you're asking for everything, you need to specifically ask for behavioral health. So asking for that treatment record from the military psychiatrist, that is something that you have to explicitly ask for based on what I've been told. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I've been told. I received this through DoD Safe, which is a method for sharing files and documents in a password protected way. For some people, they receive their information on a disk. I hope that there's people that aren't still doing that, but that was a thing. I don't know if that's still a thing. If you have any care records outside of active duty, or if you've ever seen outside of your command or your military treatment facility, so grab those records as well. So anything at a clinic that you saw on your own because you didn't want that to be part of your active duty military medical record. Anytime that you use TRICARE to go see an out-of-town provider, you do have to request those records separately because that's not incorporated into the Genesis system. What maybe I don't think people quite understand is in the civilian world, there's not just a single electronic health record system. There's Epic, and there's several other competing companies that have strong regional holds based on whatever part of the country that they're in and what system that they've had contracts with. So these electronic health record systems do not talk to each other. If you are like me and you were around when paper medical records and dental records are still being kept, that's not being recorded anywhere else. So you need to take that and you need to scan that. If you're having trouble finding a scanner, if your command office, whatnot, doesn't have a scanner that you can scan to email, there are some other recommendations that I can give you that are at the end of the third presentation so that you can get your stuff taken care of. Ensure that your person who's actually filing the claim on your behalf and going into the va.gov system, ensure that they're actually accredited. So there's a lot of scammers out there. There are a lot of people making profit off of veterans because we're going through this tough transition process. And frankly, like, we don't know any better. That's why you're here. And I appreciate you being here, but not everybody knows that. So there are accredited people listed in the VA's website, and this is the link to that. Some people that you can look for besides those veteran organizations like American Legion, the Disabled American Veterans, DAV, states will have their own Department of Veteran Affairs. They may be called something different, but they exist. So the Texas Veterans Commission, that's what it's called in Texas. In Virginia, it's called the Department of Veteran Services, so DVS. You can use any VSO anywhere else in the country. You don't have to stay in your duty station. You don't have to do a face-to-face meeting. Like, it is possible for other people in other parts of the country to assist you with your claim. There are some law schools that will have clinics for their law students to assist veterans, because remember, this is a legal process. It is beneficial for these law students to understand how to build the evidence and how to present that evidence. They're supervised like a hawk by a practitioner, an educator, somebody who's actually a practicing attorney and has experience. I don't have experience with them, so your mileage may vary, but for a fact, I know that there's two, and I've linked them right here if you want to learn more about them. Again, benefits delivery at discharge is more than between 190 days before you separate. Fully developed claims are when you've separated and within a year after you've separated or retired. And then standard initial claims are when you have left that window and you're creating your first claim for the first time. A lot of that latter one applies to Vietnam veterans because they weren't sure if their benefits that they. The big important thing that I want you to understand is if you have the opportunity to do BDD, like fight tooth and nail to do it, because everyone has lives and getting a result quicker is better, because then you have a time frame to appeal. You have options that you can look at. The money's coming faster. The benefits come faster. Like there's so many benefits to benefits delivery at discharge that like this is worth fighting for. And I want to say that from somebody who has unfortunately missed that opportunity for BDD because my VSO submitted my claim stuff later than the deadline would allow, several weeks after the deadline was. And I did not receive permission from my command to go to compensation and pension exams if I was given that opportunity. So there was a double whammy. It wouldn't have worked out either way, but not only was I waiting the 90 days after I separate, I was also waiting 266 days for my claim to be adjudicated after I left service. It is possible for part of your claim to be adjudicated early so that you have a rating instead of the full rating that you need more evidence or examinations for, but it's not something that should be a given, right? You shouldn't expect that to happen. For BDD claims, I've heard of stories of people getting their claim adjudicated within a month after they've left the military, the day after they left the military, right? So your mileage may vary. There's a lot of factors that are tied to that, but you are the priority. The burden of proof is lesser for those going through the BDD process and the fully developed claim process. So what I mean by that is at some point you have to describe how the disability and the impact it has to your own day-to-day life, how that is tied to your active duty service. Okay. When you are filing BDD, guess what? You're still active duty, so you don't have to prove that. The assumption is the care you're receiving is for stuff that you've incurred while you're in active duty. For fully developed claims, most things, not all, most conditions are presumed tied to service connected because it's happened within a year of you leaving active duty. Okay, so timing matters. Not everyone knows this, but there's at least 3 levels of raters that review your disability claims process, right? And this is why whenever I hear the myth of like people out there, veterans out there being scammed in the system and everything, I understand that that's true, right? Like there is a way to cheat the system, but I want to say that this system is aligned more to assist veterans in making the claim that they deserve. I don't know about you, but I feel like if there's 3 raters and there's two of those 3 raters that can kick claims processes all the way back and start the process over, and there's multiple offices around the country that are handling these cases and they get passed off depending on what phase they're in, there's a lot of people looking at these disability claims. And it's a legal process, so you have to prove that you're entitled to these claims. So to me, it seems like that's a misnomer. That's a myth. I don't think that it's as prevalent as maybe we think it out to be. And I just wanted to say that as a way of encouragement for people who feel like I don't have anything to claim or like I don't hurt that badly. Please, for your sake, for your family's sake, for your future's family's sake, get the thing that you deserve. There's 2 types of websites. There's the benefit VA website, and then there's a va.gov website. If you want to take a look at the difference, there's the link there. I prefer the va.gov website. The benefits VA website is kind of confusing because it has the exact same information that's on va.gov. And that's where I have an issue with. It's the same amount of information, but it's duplicated. But one website might have information that the other one doesn't have. So just understand that there's 2 main types of VA websites. Okay? Awards matter. If you're looking at your DD 214 draft and you're like, cool, I'm out of here. Like, I don't care. I have everything settled. I have a job, whatever it may be. Awards do matter. Awards do matter. And the easiest time for you to correct that is when you're still in active duty. Like, I beg of you, if you are entitled to campaign medals, the Armed Forces Service Medal, the Global War and Terrorism Expeditionary Medal, Purple Hearts, like make sure that that is in your respective service record. your respective services electronic record, and then have that reflected on your DD-214. Because there's a lot of programs that open up within the VA for scholarships, for the Armed Forces Service Medal. There is a legal protection for federal contractors and subcontractors that they have to adhere to, that you become a protected veteran under the fact that you have this medal. So keep that in mind. I've linked more information if you want to learn more about that. I don't exactly know what that entails or how that's is actually done in practice as a protection for that class of veterans, but that link is there if you want to learn more about that. All right, next, if you're actually in the claims process, again, the guiding regulation is the 38 CFR Part 4. This is the 38 Code for Federal Regulations Part 4. All right, this will list out the types of diagnoses that the VA accepts, how they determine between two closely related disabilities, how they rate the disabilities based on the symptoms and how it affects occupational and social well-being. For most people, this is going to be a very difficult thing to read. For people who've read technical documents, like I'm looking at you, Tom, because you and I were both Navy, it's easy to read through, or we have experience reading that. I would say that for the most people, this knowledge-based website is going to be a better resource. It's easier to read. It's the same information. If you have questions about something, you can double check that in the 38 CFR Part 4. But for the layperson, the knowledge-based website is going to be so much more easier to read and so much more easy to comprehend. There's no cost involved. There's no money being made. It's a wiki. It's a compilation of people's knowledge and experiences. There's also the veteran benefits subreddit. If you don't know what Reddit is a forum in which people can share their personal stories, answers to people's questions, and it's a way for people to get questions answered. I would recommend that for most people, this is not like a super great resource because it's not going to give you directly applicable information that you need for your claims process. Everything you need can be done through the knowledge-based website. I am just active on it as a lurker, and I read through because it gives me heads up on things about the VA or benefits that I've never heard of before, because I like that information. I like knowing more about what's available. Okay. So 3 parts of a successful claim. So you have to have a service-connected disability or service-aggravated disability. So there's that service connection tie-in that you have to have. You need to have current symptoms like diagnoses, and then you also have to have an effect on your occupational and social life. Right? When we say compensation and pension exams, I'll talk more about that in a second. But current symptoms and diagnoses, for some people, like I mentioned before, you were treated for a condition, but you were never officially diagnosed with that while you were in service. So that's part of the reason why compensation and pension exams exist, is so that they can confirm and actually give you the diagnosis that you need for VA disability claims processes. This was a worthwhile exercise that I wish that I knew ahead of time, and I wish that I had done ahead of time, because it would have helped me sort through all like this whole process that's like very convoluted and very intensive and taxing. Right? I can't imagine what it's like for somebody who served 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, right? I can't remember what I ate yesterday. So this is going to be something that I think is going to be helpful. So if we're going to open this up. So what was recommended to me was filing out periods of service. You can break it up at location, deployment, however it is that you best can chunk up your time in service. When you have that, then you can include the list of every tragic or traumatic event that you encountered, whether it was you or to somebody you know or to somebody that you saw. Next, you can list the injuries sustained during that time period, right? So things that happened to you or that you sought treatment for, maybe didn't have quite the diagnosis yet, but this way you can start listing things out, right? So if we look at this example all the way down here, we have an example. So reported to the first duty station, First Airborne XYZ unit stationed in Germantown, Pineapple Land. For example, something tragic or traumatic that's happened. So squad member was unable to be revived and pronounced dead at scene after parachuting into several power lines and being electrocuted to death. An example of some injury sustained, right? Slipped spinal disc. So I've included this document in this folder so that you have a guide to build on, a template to build on, and I hope that it helps some of you out. VERA is a way in which you can get in touch with the Veteran Benefits Administration employees. Some people recommend that for your claims process, you call into like a VA hotline and you dial the number and whatnot. Those are general VA employees. What you want to talk with is somebody who actually has experience helping veterans with the benefits process, whether it's through the GI Bill, the home loan, or in our case, the disability claims. You can schedule an in-person appointment. You can walk in, but you can schedule an in-person appointment, or you can schedule for a call, a call that you will receive at a later time frame. Typically, these are about a week out, so you're probably not going to get same-day service, but you can go ahead and schedule that. These are the examples of things you can ask about, and I want to say that the important one is this one right here, status of claim. They can look on their side of things and tell you where the claim is being handled, what location it's at. And for those of you that are like myself who have anxiety about where things are progressing and why things are taking so long, this might give you some peace of mind in knowing that it's being passed off to another office, or like it's physically being taken care of at this certain office. It doesn't mean there's other things that you can't ask, but these are the list of things that you can ask about. Now, you don't have to stay in your state. In fact, I encourage you not to stay in your state, because in your state, there might be an abundance of veterans. Whereas, no offense to Wyoming, but I don't think there's like as many veterans in Wyoming as there is in Florida. So you can call for a different state. Just make sure you note the difference between the time zones. All right, so personal statements and lay statements. This is additional evidence that you can provide as part of your claims process. Personal statements is how you describe how it's impacted you and the events that occurred that cause you to have whatever it is that you're trying to claim in your condition. Lay statements, also known as buddy statements, are when somebody else writes on your behalf. So typically this is a spouse, a battle buddy, a friend who's known you before and after the incident had occurred, a roommate, a coworker. These are people that you can reach out to and ask. That's why it's important that when you separate, you don't burn all your active duty bridges, because some of those people may actually be in a position to help you in your claim. They may not understand why it's important yet, but it may be the thing that brings you across the finish line for a claim process, because there might not be sufficient evidence to give you the diagnosis and the CMP examinations that you need. These are two separate forms. Apparently, this used to be where the VA would accept any sort of paper with stuff scribbled on it. I don't think that that's the case anymore. So make sure that you use the correct form when you have people fill this out, and have them electronically sign it before you submit it to va.gov. Okay? If they don't know where to start, or you don't know where to start, somebody did develop a AI generator for this. The way I understand is you put inputs into it, it gets filtered through a bunch of prompts for OpenAI, and then you get a very robotic letter that you can use as a template. I encourage you and your friends and family to use this as a starting point so that they know like how it should be oriented in like the chunks of the paragraphs, but ultimately it needs to be in their voice because it is very robotic. The OpenAI uses like a certain way of phrasing things that makes it very obvious that it's AI. And that's unfortunate, but I just want to make sure you know that when you share people this resource, they need to make sure that they change it and make it their own. Okay. Once you have evidence and lay statements, personal statements, you need to upload it to va.gov. And in part 2, I'll show you where to do that. There's also a method where you can upload it through a program called Quick Submit. I don't recommend using this if you have access to va.gov, which should be everybody. I can't fathom a reason why it wouldn't pop up. But Quick Submit is a way that you can upload the documentation. But the reason why I don't like this is because you don't get immediate feedback that it's actually been captured by the VA system. Like you don't have any feedback that says that your stuff was actually submitted and uploaded into the VA disability claims process system. Benefit is of 0% rating. So I've had this conversation several times with several of my veteran friends and people who are still active duty. Even if you think that it's not worthwhile to put the effort in, or that you don't have anything that's rateable, well, guess what? Let the raters decide, because they have been trained and they are the ones that's supposed to adjudicate that. Let the CMP examiners figure that out, because that's their job. That's what they're getting paid to do. And then some additional things, right? Even if you get a 0% rating, if you get a 0% rating overall, like all of your disabilities that you're rated for are 0%, that still gets you into a higher VA healthcare priority group enrollment. That still gets you easier access to get into that thing. And if you don't quite understand what a priority group is, I'll explain that in part 2. If your condition gets worse, and we're human beings, we get old. If your condition gets worse, then you have already taken the first step to establish a service connection. That speaking to VSOs, that is the most difficult thing to prove. And I would argue that when you've separated within the first 2 years, or if you're doing the BDD program, I would argue that those people have an easier time for showing proof than somebody who has been out for 30 years and is past their 50s and is saying, oh man, I missed my opportunity. So even if you have a 0%, that can still help you. Hooking secondaries. So when you leave the service or you're doing your initial claim for the first time, all these claims are going to be primary, right? There's a direct service connection. These are primary claims. Secondary claims are claims that you are saying have developed as a result of another condition that was service connected or service aggravated. There's more specifics to that I don't fully know well enough to explain, but the idea is you can get a higher percentage rating by having these conditions after showing proof that it's connected to a service connected or service aggravated condition. And then lastly, this happened to me, but 0% ratings can lead to a combined rating. It's kind of like a clearly these things are all affecting you. So as a total, we're going to just give you a small something so that it's not nothing. All right, separation health assessment. So when you leave the military as a retiree or separating, you are required to do a comprehensive medical examination for the Department of Defense. So the Department of Veteran Affairs does their own separate one. Legally speaking, the one done by the VA should cover the requirements for the Department of Defense. I'll tell you my perspective, my viewpoint. I was told that, hey, we in the military, we have our checklists and we have our requirements. You shall do this examination, even though the VA one already counts for this. So it's just an additional way for you to notate and annotate things that are bothering you. Just see it as that way. But it is something that you should budget time for or expect that you should have time for. Okay. There is a part A and a part B. Part B is like the actual examination and sitting down with an examiner. Part A is another opportunity for you to write everything that's bothering you down, right? Every diagnosis, it's going to ask you, how often you've hit your head or if you've ever hit your head before. It's going to ask about things that you were exposed to while in the service. This is definitely a very big, beefy document that you should look back, not just several days, but several weeks. There's a concept called flare-ups. And what that means is a disability or an issue that you have doesn't happen or affect to you every single day, or there's a spectrum of which it affects you. Right? Flare-ups do happen. And let's say a condition doesn't appear on a day, but it does appear on a different day. You want to be able to have enough time for you to fill out this Part A separation health assessment so that you can encapsulate some of these flare-ups, because you're not going to be thinking about it. You're not going to remember, right? 3 years, 5 years, 25 years, you're going to forget that it is a thing until it actually affects you for that particular day. And then that's when you need to note it down because you just happen to remember. Tom has spoken about disability benefits questionnaires before. I just want to say that there's a public and a private. I don't have enough examples of the private one to see how it's different from the public one that's available on this website. But just to show you, I had to do a Freedom of Information Act poll in order to pull my private filled out disability benefit questionnaire. And I wanted to show it to you so that you have an example and understand how it looks like after it's been filled out. All right. So if we look here, this is what it looks like. Notice it says Internal Veterans Affairs Use, but this was done through a contractor for compensation and pension. And it was not done by the. This is going to be up in that folder, so if you want to take a closer look at it, feel free to. I just wanted to show something. So if we look here, this information was pulled directly from my service jacket, from my DD-214, and from the things that I submitted before. And I'm going to be honest, I'm very sure that my examiner has no idea what a first lieutenant afloat is. Most people in the military and in the veteran space have no idea what that means either. But clearly, she just pulled a bunch of things that thought would help my case, and I just wanted to show that here. Notice here, I also had 2 of my ribbons reflected here as well because it pertains to my claim for tinnitus. And going back to what I said earlier, awards do matter, so here it is. If you've never seen this before, I just wanted to say what this means. This is clearly just the numbers from every single audiogram that I've had while in service. But STS stands for Significant Threshold Shift. When you joined the military, you were given a baseline audiogram, and based on that baseline, there's a certain accepted amount in which your hearing can deviate. When it's outside those bounds, those statistically determined bounds, that's what's called a significant threshold shift, and that is a symbol or start of hearing degradation. So for me, in this case, I have had several years in which that was indicated. Okay, scrolling down here, diagnosis, medical history. This is where my verbal encapsulation of what I was doing, the things I was exposed to, this is where it was captured. Going down here, this is important. So funky language to say that 50% likely versus not likely that tinnitus was connected to my service. In this case, it was marked yes. And then the examiner has to explain why. They explain why, they explain the exposures, and they also added in a copy and pasted court cases that happened in the past as precedent. Okay. And the last thing I wanted to show on here was, I'll talk more about the different CMP contractors, but in my case, Leidos QTC Medical Group had a specific clinic in which they had several examiners under the same roof, so that ideally, if they're scheduling a veteran to be examined, they can go to multiple examinations, knock them all out because they're all under the same roof. I don't think that that is the norm. It's more typical that you would drive or go to a examiner's office and then that's where they would examine you. I'm just saying that don't be surprised that this is the thing. All right. Compensation pension exams. Reliving your worst day during flare-ups. If you don't remember anything else, the compensation and pension exams, they're not treating you. They're not treating you. They're there to verify a diagnosis that you've had. And if you don't have that diagnosis, they're going to give it to you, especially if you don't have them in your record, and especially if a lot of time has passed between when you separated or retired from active duty. Okay. Typically, from what I've seen, the VA doesn't typically do their own compensation and pension exams, nor would I want them to do it because that seems like a conflict of interest. So typically, these are done through three major subcontractors. We have the Veterans Evaluation Service, Leidos QTC, and OptumServe. I've included the numbers here right now. As far as I understand, these are the same numbers nationwide, but one of the methods that you can be notified that you've been selected and you've been scheduled for a compensation pension exam is by calling. And I don't know about you, but I don't pick up calls from people I don't know. So if you add these into your address book, you know that it's important, and at the very least, you should call them back. Right? You will be called, you will be mailed, and you will be emailed. Chances are, if you're mailed this information packet, or when you get mailed this information packet, because I've been cycled through all three contractors, and they do things fairly similarly. By the time you receive the mail packet, chances are your compensation pension exam that was scheduled might have already passed. So it's important to use the other two methods to receive that information. If you are outside the country or if you have a different address, you can ask for an examination elsewhere, and you can also ask for examination overseas. I don't know if the examiner comes to you if it's overseas, or I don't know if you have to meet them at a local clinic. I'm not sure how that works, but it is a thing, and people have told me that is a thing. Like everything else involved with the VA, chances are you're going to be required to call. I don't know about you. I hate calling, but it is something that you have to do. With every three of these contractors, you have to call if you desire to reschedule. And it's important that you have to go. If you look at the regulations, you are required to appear for your CMP exams. They're not optional. If they're ordered, then that means that you are not doing your part in assisting the VA in determining your disability compensation. And so that leads to bad consequences. So if you have to reschedule, call in. Typically, they only let you reschedule once per the type of appointment that you have for examination. If you're like me and was unable to do it within the next 30 days, then that contract gets returned to the VA, where it'll be recycled and probably sent to a different contractor. I don't know how long you can have this going. I don't recommend you play that game, but that's how that works. If a contractor has an online portal account, create one. And this is the reason why it's important, okay? Check your appointments the night before you go. Check the appointments because there might be last minute scheduling changes. I've seen it in person where I've seen veterans show up for the examination. They have their email on their phone, they have their packet in their other hand, and they say, I have an examination appointment this morning, only to find out that the examiner had canceled or had rescheduled or something else had happened. In my case, when things were not scheduled and things were rescheduled, I was not notified about it. And if I wasn't notified in time. So I just so happened to check the online portal and found out that my CMP examination had been rescheduled. And that was like a lifesaver for me. VES is weird in that it requires you to call in specifically for instructions on how to set up an account. Just be aware that you have to do another call for that. Okay. CMP examinations, there's a lot of information out there. I just want to encapsulate important things that I think is important before you go into a compensation and pension exam. All right. Number one, assume that they have no records at all. They have no idea what they're examining you for. They have no idea why you're there. They have no idea who you are, what you've done, how long you've been out, that kind of thing. Assume that they don't have any of that. So be prepared to answer those questions when you enter. Remember that this is a examination and not a treatment. So while they may have medical credentials, they're not there to treat you. And for some people, that might seem a little cold, right? So just be aware that you're there on business, they're there on business, and they're there to do a job. So don't take that to heart. But come into the interaction assuming they have no records at all. And if they do have records, if they do have your Genesis electronic records that are scrolling through it, and they're like, oh yeah, perfect. This is things that I need to copy and paste into the disability benefits questionnaire. That's a great sign. But if not, you need to come prepared to speak about the dates, the events that happened, how it's affecting you every day in your social life. Assume that the records, evidence, and devices that you do bring will not be included in the CMP examiner's report. Okay. So what I mean by that is if you're trying to, let's say, include a leg brace in your evidence, okay, you can show it to the CMP examiner. You say, hey, I was prescribed this on this date. This is something I use this often to alleviate this level of pain. It's not going to be encapsulated within the rater's viewpoint when the raters from the VA are looking at your disability claim process. So you need to remember to submit that as separate evidence. It will help the CMP examiner make their decision and their findings, but you need to submit that separately as part of the VA disability claims process. These are the questions that I would, at the very minimum, have ready to answer when you go into this examination. What are you diagnosed with? When? Were you diagnosed at all during active duty, or were you simply seen and treated? And then what event or situation of service caused the condition or exacerbated the conditions, right? For some conditions and some things, that may be a prolonged period of time. So keep that in mind. It may not be a single specific incident, but there might be a time period in which you were stationed somewhere and you were exposed, for example, to burn pits. All right, that's just an example. What are your current symptoms? How often do you get them? And then I would also describe the pain scale, right? Before they even ask, give them the pain scale. On a scale of 10, how much does the pain affect you when there is a flare-up? Okay. Also keep in mind that typically veterans will typically self-censor, and we will go 2 pain levels below what a normal civilian would rate, okay? On your worst day, what is the pain scale like? How does this condition affect your current social and occupational life? This prevents me from doing a job that requires me to lift anything heavier than 15 pounds. This condition prevents me from standing for longer than 20 minutes. This condition prevents me from driving at night, which is unfortunately in the career that I'm in, is where most of my job opportunities are at. This condition affects my ability to interact and have a relationship with my romantic partner. So PACT Act and presumptions. So PACT Act is a law and is also an extension of a law passed by Congress in which several conditions are automatically presumed to be service connected based on a veteran status and where they were stationed at, right? So the 2 big groups that this affect are Vietnam veterans, typically for Agent Orange, which is a chemical defoliation spray that was used and has known to cause cancer, and burn pits, which is known to cause a plethora of health issues. right? So part of the reason why the Veteran Benefits Administration has been playing catch up with VA disability claims is because these laws came out, right? The American people are looking out for us, and it's a good thing that there's more people that have the ability to have claims now, because they've been exposed in the past to these chemicals, irritants, conditions. Now these cancers and stuff are showing up, and now they're considering, hey, I need to file a VA claim because my care needs to be paid for. Otherwise, it's going to medically cripple myself and my family. So it is a good thing. I just want you to know that it will delay the VA disability claims process. So an example that I want to give is exposure is not the same as having a disease or resulting condition that's come out of that, right? So for example, burn pits, not compensable. Burn pits is not a condition, but kidney cancer is listed on the VA website as one of the conditions that's automatically service connected, presumed automatically service connected if you've been exposed to burn pits. And I believe that that's something that's going to affect several people who are watching this webinar. Even if conditions that you were exposed to aren't covered by law now, that doesn't mean that they won't be in the future. As more and more future laws come out, we don't know what's going to change about how the VA claims process is going to be like, but it's important that you note this on your separation health assessment part A. For me, for example, I was exposed to asbestos on my second ship. There was a asbestos-filled brake pad that was used to clamp onto the anchor chains that when we were letting them out. So there is exposure there, and there's residual exposure there. PFAS is a forever chemical that's used in firefighting retardant foam. I was exposed to it when I was working in engineering spaces during the first part of my career, and then also as a firefighter. For the VA claim status Chrome extension, this is something that was recommended by members of VetSec. It's a Chrome extension in which it crawls through the data that's on the va.gov website when you log in, and it gives you information about where your claim is at. I don't have a lot of experience with this, but I hope it provides some information that's helpful to other people as they're waiting for their claim process to be adjudicated. Moving on to the post-claims decision. All right, you're going to get a decision letter. It's best if you can get that decision letter electronically so that you don't have to wait forever for it to get mailed, because I got mine 2 weeks after I was notified. You won't get an email. You won't get notified that the claim decision has been decided. You just have to happen to be logged into va.gov and happen to see that you're rated a percentage. And then that's how you know. That's the first time that you get notified that you have a decision that was made. Okay. So I'm going to show you mine with heavy redactations on here. And you can look on this at your own time, but I'm going to quickly go over certain things. Notice the date. Notice the date. This is effective the day after I left active duty. This first part here is a summary in total of things that were denied, things that were accepted, and at what percentage and what for. Here, this says who your veteran service officer or whoever it is that was helping you with your VA claim. They also get a copy for their statistics and information. This is a QR code to more resources. I blocked them out because it's not necessary for us today. This is an example of how I was provided 10% based on multiple 0%. Here we have the monthly entitlement amounts, right? So here, every single change to your compensation, typically that's greater than 30%. Every single change is tracked here, right? So if you're adding, removing dependents, whether there is a cost of living adjustment, this is where it will be recorded. Pays in arrears. Same thing with the GI Bill military housing allowance. Pays in arrears, which means that after the month is passed, on the start of the next month, that's when you get paid for the previous month. And then just so you know, I was back paid for this, but it's not encapsulated here. Okay. This is where you verify that your dependent spouse parents are added, because that affects the rate that you get your disability compensation. More on this later. These are the 3 different branches of how you can make a appeal down here. So it's important to know. I don't think everybody knows this. You can be a member of the reserves and also be disabled in the VA's eyes. The only difference is you can't receive pay for the same day from both. So let's say you're going for drill weekend, and on a single drill day, there's 2 drill periods. For that day, you cannot also receive concurrently the VA disability claim for that day, right? So you can't have both on the same day, but it is possible for you to do both. If you are using the VA home loan, you can get the funding fee retroactively given back to you. And moving forward, you will no longer have a funding fee. Additional government insurance through VA Life, if that's something that you are seeking to do. We'll talk more about getting access to commissary exchanges later. Above 30% or treatment for a service-connected disability, there is a way in which you can get reimbursement for travel to that clinic or to that hospital or that treatment facility. And I'll talk about that. Okay. These are the three types of higher level reviews that you can ask for. If you have more evidence, you can use the supplemental claim. If you want to use the same evidence and have somebody else look at the exact same claim you had submitted originally, you would use the higher level review. And if you wanted to go all out or you're having trouble with the other two, you can ask for an actual judge to decide on your case. Okay. This is where the list of evidence is. Note the dates. Okay. This is when the disability benefits questionnaire, my general one, was received from that contractor company. And then this is indicating that my personal statement was received and viewed, as well as my private treatment records for this specific condition. Okay. Now, part of you is like thinking, why in the world is so much of this blacked out? And part of that reason is because it is a lot more difficult for a rater to say that you are not entitled or you're not entitled to a higher level than it is for them to just to say yes. So that's why all of this verbiage, all of the court cases, all of the pulling references from the 38 CFR Part 4, that's what all of this is for every single condition, every single claim, every single item that was asked to be looked into, which is why this is more than 17 pages long. Okay. These are different parts. Service connectivity, assignment for the percentage, why a higher one is not warranted. Okay. Diagnosed disability with no compensable symptoms. You can have a service connection for something, but it might not affect your occupational and social life. And in most cases, that doesn't meet the minimum criteria for 10% or higher. Okay. This is an example of when a court case is referenced. Okay. If you're ever looking at this and you're like, I don't know what this is, it's like, this interferes with your occupation at blank. This is the VA's largest veterans readiness and employment contract. Okay. This is a finding of no sufficient evidence, the definitions, how the definitions weren't met, and then in the final determination that this is not service connected because there's no evidence for a claim condition that exists. Okay. Not an actually disabling condition. Right. And this is an example of pyramiding. So the term pyramiding refers to when there's multiple conditions, typically in the same area of the body, that are different conditions, but the symptoms are the same. So long story short, what's going to happen is the highest of whatever ratings that is provided to you for those conditions, only one of them comes out on top. The other one is neglected or thrown away, and then that one is the one that remains. That's what pyramiding refers to. From what I've seen, I haven't exactly looked at where it explicitly says this, but if you're in a veteran to veteran marriage, then you have the ability to both claim with dependents, with the spouse, whatever it is that you need, and you'll both get the higher rate, if that makes sense. Okay. This question gets asked a lot. Is this compensation tax-free? And the answer is yes. And typically the threshold is 30% disability, total disability. But your mileage may vary because there are certain conditions below that you can start getting compensation for. There is a big difference between 90% benefits and 100%. So if we open this up, I just want to show you that there is a significant difference, right? Assume that I have a spouse and I have one child and I am at a 70%. So with dependents, including children, compensation rates for 70%. Okay. Look in the left-hand column. I have one child and a spouse. My parents are not my dependents. And we're looking at a 70% rating. Okay. Then we'll look at the 80% rating. Look at the 90% rating. And then we'll look at the 100% rating. So there is a stark difference between the two. I just want to make sure people understand that that is there. All right. So when people refer to a condition as static, that just means that the VA is not intending or scheduled for the veteran to be re-examined again. All right. So that's important because I don't know about you, but I would hate to have to constantly prove all my disabilities every single time that the blue moon comes around. So it is important to figure out if the conditions that you were rated for are static. There is instructions in this Reddit page of how to pull that from the VA website. Another way that you can get that is through what's called the rating code sheet. Let me show you what mine looks like. The way I got this is I had to physically show up to my regional center, my Veteran Benefits Administration regional center, and then ask them for this. They printed it out, they took a Sharpie, and they Sharpied over the name of the person who made the final rating, who officially stamped my claim. And I got this, okay? So this is what it would look like. Again, officially the Gulf War hasn't ended yet, so most people that are listening to this are probably going to be considered veterans of the Gulf War, okay? And then notice it says static disability. That means future examinations are not required for me to continue receiving monthly compensation for at least tinnitus case. All right. And I'm just saying Freedom of Information Act is going to take a long time. Like I'm still waiting on mine. This is another example if you want to see what a rating code sheet looks like. For the disability benefits questionnaires, if you're trying to get the ones that were submitted from the compensation pension exams, you have to do a Freedom of Information Act request. Expect months. Some people waited years for their stuff to be submitted. I got mine after 4 months of waiting. I recommend that if you do this, the important thing is asking just for the C&P examination DBQs. The C file refers to every single thing that the VA has on you in terms of disability claims. And what I've heard is people will usually receive those in CD format. That's not necessary for you to move on to the next process of review for your claims, okay? Now that you've been rated, congratulations. I recommend submitting new intensive files annually because you don't lose anything by having that intent to file. But let's say something does change in your life, or you do change your mind and you do want to appeal something, or you do have another condition that you want to add in, or you have a secondary condition that's popped up. You have the ability to get back paid all the way to the date of the intent to file. So it is advantageous for you to have a reminder to do an intent to file every single year. So the last thing I wanted to cover on this section is I think it's a common knowledge item to where if veterans are filing their claims and they have issues with the length of time or there's concerns about their claim not being processed properly, then those veterans have the ability to go to their Congress people or their senators and actually get that issue resolved. I want to show a different method of resolving that if it gets to that point where you do feel like you do need some help. All right. So there's a White House hotline. This is the number that's specifically dedicated to assist veterans cut through the red tape and get to the correct person that can answer or help with their needs at the Department of Veteran Affairs. So if you are in that position, then this is the phone number for you. A lot of people don't know that this exists. That concludes part one. Part two is when I go over VA healthcare and how that system actually works. And part three is miscellaneous other items.